Thank you, Guru Ganguly-ji. And thank you everyone for coming. If you'll indulge me a moment. I'm genuinely humbled to speak at the S.P. Mukherjee Research Foundation, named for someone who ensured a democratic future for 10 crores of Indians. For those of you who don't know the term, that's 100 million people. And thinking of S.P. Mukherjee, I really have to make very clear, Mukherjee was someone who was defending Indian democracy, defended it with his life. I'm not here to defend Indian democracy. That's your job as Indians. I'm here to expose the international critics of Indian democracy for what they are. For what they are is liars. I know that's a big statement. Let me start at the beginning. First, it's often said that India is the world's largest democracy. That's an irrelevant accolade. Democracy is unrelated to country size. There are small democracies, big democracies. Size of country has no bearing on democratic institutions. The striking thing about India is that India is by far the world's poorest democracy. Now, I don't use poor as an insult, I use it as a descriptor. GDP per capita, median income, use whatever measure you want. India is by far the world's poorest democracy. If you want to find another country that has not 75 years, even 3 decades of consistent, free and fair elections with peaceful transfer of power, with a functioning judiciary, with an executive that respects the decisions of the judiciary even when they disagree with those decisions. If you want to find this kind of country, you have to look to countries that are at least GDP per capita $10,000 per person per year. 5 times as rich as India. But even then, you're looking at countries in Eastern Europe, primarily, which are democracies because they had to be democracies to gain entry into the European Union. Their democracies are very strongly institutionally buttressed by European Union membership. If we look for countries that organically developed a democracy on their own, without being forced to, well, then you start looking at the South Koreas and Taiwans, which again have only been democracies for 30 years, not 75 years. In other words, you have to look to countries that are 10 to 15 times as rich as India to find a single country, a single one, that is a democracy of the sort that meets the basic criteria of a liberal democratic system. India is also the only post-colonial country, again, categorically, maybe some small island states, we can leave micro-states aside. Otherwise, categorically, the only post-colonial country to have remained a democracy throughout its entire post-colonial history. You might say Israel. Israel's not really a post-colonial country. Israel is a settler colonial country. We can debate that, but clearly Israel is a special case. It's not an ordinary decolonized society. The only post-colonial country to have remained a democracy throughout its history. India, geographically, is also the only country on the Eurasian landmass between South Korea on one end and Israel on the other that is a well-institutionalized democracy. Now, I don't know if international pressures and geography and the difficulty of being in a tough neighborhood affect a democracy, but if it does, India is in a very tough neighborhood and yet has remained a democracy. Okay. I'm a statistician. I'm not an India expert. I'm a social statistician. From a statistical perspective, if we were to model democracy, we would control for things like GDP per capita. We would control for post-colonial history. We would control for geography. If we introduce those kinds of statistical controls, India becomes an extreme outlier in the democracy sweepstakes. India is the world's, and Dr. Ganguly, you already quoted this from a previous statement, India is the world's most extraordinarily successful democracy. Maybe not the world's most successful, we can debate that, we can try to compare the United States or New Zealand, everyone loves Jacinda Ardern these days, and compare it with India. Okay, fine, but New Zealand is not extraordinarily successful. New Zealand is just ordinarily successful for a country of its heritage and its income level. India is the most, by far, the most extraordinarily successful democracy in the world. Yet, The Economist says that India is a flawed democracy, worse than South Africa. South Africa has serious problems, India is worse. Varieties Democracy Institute ranks India, and I'm not kidding, on a par with Myanmar. Not pre-coup Myanmar, post-coup Myanmar. They put post-coup Myanmar 2 places below India, but only 1 point on their scale below India. In other words, a country run by a military junta is roughly on a par in their view of what a democracy should be with India. Of course, Freedom House rates India as only partially free, Kashmir as absolutely unfree. Okay. Now, you all heard about the democracy paper I wrote on the democracy rankings. I'm not going to go through it in detail again. It's on the website. You could read it. I'll just quote my favorite quote from it. The mendacity of the rankings, the most obvious one that anyone can understand. All of the rankings, not all of them, most of them cite the figure that more journalists are killed in India than in any other country outside China. Of course, there are more people with black hair in India than in any country outside China. There are more toilets in India than in any country outside China. There's more of everything in India than in any country outside China. You have to adjust for population size. Okay. In India, the journalist death rate, we all want that to be 0. In India, 3.5 per billion people. 5 journalists, 3.5 per billion. Rest of world, 6.3 per billion. Despite the fact that India is a relatively poor country, where we would expect journalists to be unsafe because it's a relatively poor country and there are all sorts of dangers in a relatively poor country, journalists are safer in India than in rest of world, far safer. Yet the Reporters Sans Frontières World Press Freedom Index rates India below Hong Kong. That's not below pre-security law Hong Kong. That's below 2022 Hong Kong. All right, if these facts were genuine, maybe everyone has a right to an opinion. That's fine, they can view things differently. As long as they're talking from the facts, they can interpret them the way they like. It's a free world. People can have their opinions. But there is a responsibility to protect errors. Now, in the paper I wrote, I pointed out lots of errors. I'm very skeptical that those errors will be corrected in next year's rankings. I can't prejudge. It might happen, but I will be very surprised if it happens. But more importantly than more important than the responsibility to correct errors is the responsibility to tell the truth in the first place. Fair errors I can forgive. Intentional misrepresentations I find much more troubling. I'll give you an example, not from the democracy rankings. I'll make it personal. I don't usually try to bring myself into my lectures. I've become, however, a topic of conversation, so let me view myself objectively as a topic of conversation. On Monday, the print ran a story on my foreign agent registration in the US. The journalist contacted me. We had a nice conversation. I joked with her a little bit. I told her not only am I registered in the US, I'm also registered in Australia. Here's the website. I even looked up, neither website tells the amount of the contract. I looked up my tax records. I gave her the exact amount, $4,000. I gave her that as a percentage of my income, which is about 2% of my annual income for 1 year. She duly reported on it. She wrote a factual article. The next day, Shekhar Gupta invited me to come to the print for a conversation. I was thrilled. I went in, we had a long chat. I joked with him about his clickbait. You know, they ran a title, Foreign Agent Salvatore Babones. But the article was entirely factual. There was no misrepresentation in the article. They put foreign agent in quotation marks. You know, a publisher has to make money. Clicks are how you make money. I'm an India Today bot, so they had to make money off me. Somehow they made it off this format. And kudos to them. They're real journalists who do the legwork, who do the hard work to find out these sort of facts. Great work. Unfair headline. I joked with Mr. Gupta's editorial director. I said, you know, in All the President's Men, the movie about the Watergate scandal, we all love Ben Bradley, the editor, who when Bob Woodward and Woodward and Bernstein go to him with, we have this story, and he says, who are your sources? You know, what does it say? And then he says, buried on the inside pages. And Dustin Hoffman gets up and says, but this is, and he just looks at him. You know, Jason Robards, I love the actor who played Ben Bradley. He sits back down, Dustin Hoffman sits back down. So this story should have been buried on the inside pages. Okay, fine. Perfectly factual, though. It's a new world. This is not 1975 or 1974, and you need to get clicks. I understand. And you may have seen me with Mr. Gupta holding his book on the print website. We had a great time with it. The next day, a prominent intellectual critic of India, Rutgers Newark professor Audrey Trushke, she tweeted, a reminder, folks, know your sources, especially when it comes to the BJP and Hindutva. The most recent pro-Hindutva voice, that's me, is an individual named Salvatore Babones, a registered foreign agent representing Indian interests. She did not put foreign agent in scare quotes. Okay. And she gives a link to the documents, hashtag Hindutva, hashtag BJP, hashtag India. For the record, not only have I never worked for the BJP, you didn't even pay for my hotel. I paid for my own flight to get here. But nonetheless, hashtag BJP. Okay. Right. Then she blocked me on Twitter. Now, I've never met the woman. I've never mentioned her in public. I mentioned her, I think, in passing once. I couldn't remember her name. I have never tweeted to her. Anyone who's seen my Twitter feed will know that I have never said an unnice thing on Twitter in my entire 10 years on the platform. I'll state that I challenge you to go back to my feed, find something not nice. In fact, I used to have the profile, before I went to volunteer with the Center for Independent Studies in Sydney, I used to put in my profile, Salvatore Babones, self-proclaimed nicest guy on Twitter. That was my, now it just says, you know, tweets do not represent, tweets are personal opinion. They required me to put a disclaimer in. Okay, fine. Why did she block me? Was she afraid of me in some way? No, she didn't want me to see her tweet. She didn't want me to respond. She didn't want to have a discussion about it. She didn't want to have to face scrutiny. She sniped. What is the military folks in the room? Shoot and scoot. That's the military term. Shoot and scoot. Okay. Now, someone like Professor Churchill is very aware of the US Foreign Agent Registration Act. Indians may be unfamiliar. I don't know if India has an equivalent. I know there's the registry for organizations that take foreign money, but FCRA. But I don't know how the FCRA applies to individuals. I'm not a lawyer. I know we have some Supreme Court lawyers in the audience. You tell me later. Individual people have no idea how foreign agent registration works, but Churchill does. She's very aware that foreign agent is simply a term. Well, I'll give you the definition. Individuals engaged in advocacy on behalf of foreign governments, organizations, or persons. If a foreigner hires you to do any kind of advocacy work, you're a foreign agent. Sounds bad, foreign agent? She's perfectly aware that foreign agent definition in the United States is what we Americans call a nothing burger. In fact, if you're a real foreign agent, you don't register under FARA. No self-respecting foreign agent would do a registration and pay taxes on the amount. In 2 different countries, I have to pay American and Australian taxes. Okay, now, she is not acting as a dispassionate researcher. She's acting as a political prosecutor. She's looking for a charge and seeing if she can make it stick. She knows, she must know, that she is misrepresenting the truth, but she's doing it anyway, presumably because she believes that her cause is more important than the truth. Another prominent critic of India, who's an expert on India, is Prof Salvatore. You've all heard of Prof Salvatore. He wrote a couple weeks ago in the Indian Express that Veer Vinayak Savarkar collaborated with the British by encouraging Hindus to join the British Army. He's an expert on India. He's very aware that Savarkar encouraged Hindus to join the army so that they could rebel against the British from within the army, so that they could, I know mutiny is a dirty word in India, so they could mutiny from the British perspective or start an independence war from the Indian perspective. He's very aware of that. Everyone knows that. I know that. And I'm not an historian, I'm not an India specialist. He certainly knows that. Why did he use that fact? He used it because he could selectively try to build a narrative that he knows is wrong. I mean, Christoph Jaffrelot is either an idiot or he knows he's lying. I've seen his work. It must be the second. He is not a stupid person. He is a liar. But presumably, he believes that his lie is in the greater interest of what he believes is best for India and the world, and so he's willing to lie to promote his point of view. Thomas Blom Hansen, another prominent Western intellectual, the Mukesh Ambani Professor of South Asian Studies at Stanford University. The old man is probably rolling over in his grave. Oh, cremated? Or grave? Oh, if the Ambanis get cremated, then he's not rolling over in his grave. That's an argument for cremation. You don't have to worry after you're gone, and nothing's going to happen to your body. He wrote in his new book, "Fears of Muslims and violent fantasies of revenge run through the Hindu nationalist movement right from the beginning till today." Now, I'm going to guess that most of you, not all of you, I guess most of you are probably Hindu nationalists. Do you harbor violent fantasies of revenge against Muslims? I mean, I've not seen a single work coming out of the Hindutva press engaging in violent fantasies of revenge. Not only that, it wasn't there in Savarkar 100 years ago. Can you find someone on Twitter who's expressed a violent fantasy of revenge? I'm sure you can. You can find a Muslim on Twitter who's expressed a violent fantasy of converting the Hindus. You can find anything on Twitter. But to represent that sentiment as the overall takeaway, as the overall sentiment of Hindu nationalism, he knows it's wrong. He's lying. He's not mistaken. He's not making an error. He is making a conscious lie. Again, presumably in support of what he believes sincerely would be best for the world. He's willing to falsify in order to pursue his own idealistic goals. Now, I'm not an India expert. Churchill, Jaffarullah, Hansen, they are. Okay. They presumably speak multiple Indian languages, at least one or two. They may read Sanskrit. They've spent a lifetime in study of India. I've spent a few years studying India on the side while also being the China director of a think tank and also teaching undergraduate social statistics and also writing columns about Trump. And on the side, I've been studying up on India. If I know that these are lies, they certainly know that these are lies. They are using their expertise because they know where to cherry pick information. And they are abusing their institutional capital in order to peddle facts that they know to be false in support of their political views. In my India Today speech on Saturday, I also cited Rana Ayub and Arundhati Roy as activists, not as academics, as activists who publish on India. They have a right to be activists. I don't want to criticize them so much. The dharma, if you'll allow me, the dharma of an activist is to promote a political view. Right or wrong, they're in the trenches of political battle. Well, they're going to maybe push things too far. They maybe misrepresent. I don't admire them, but I don't blame them. That's your battle. If you want to fight for Indian democracy, you fight with these Indian intellectuals who are maybe on the opposite side from you. That's your battle, it's not my battle. The dharma of a professor, of a guru, if you will, is to seek the truth. Even if the truth we find is not the truth we want. And the dharma of an editor, to bring things back to the democracy rankings, is to be skeptical, to sort fact from opinion, the wheat from the chaff. The editors at The Economist, Varieties of Democracy, Freedom House, they're not guilty of lying. They're not against India. They're not trying to destroy India. They are guilty of failing to exercise appropriate editorial oversight of the Indian activists and Western professors who provide the content for their reports. Those who love India, and in this category, bear with me, I include Churchill, Jaffarullah, Hansen, Ayub, Roy. I have no reason to think that they don't love India. But they're doing India no favor by using international platforms to fight for their preferred visions of the country, even at the expense of the country they profess to love. If they really believe in their agendas, and if they believe at all in democracy, they should take the time and effort to convince Indians of their point of view. Not to browbeat Indians into accepting them because they can get international support to push India in a certain direction. They should go out to the people of India with their message, one-on-one, shake hands, talk to people, and try to convince people to support their vision of India. I don't have a vision for India. I'm an American. I have a vision for America. It's up to you and to them to debate what the vision of India, what your future for India should be. One challenge is these intellectuals claim to speak. They claim to speak for the poor, the excluded, the voiceless. But in a democracy, no one is voiceless. Everyone has a voice. We call that the vote. Nobody can speak for the poor and the excluded. You can speak to the poor and the excluded. You can humbly ask them to listen to your point of view and to support your program for the future. Okay. Look, I'm here at the S.P. Mukherjee Research Foundation. I know that Mukherjee is most associated with his native Bengal, so I hope you'll forgive me if I quote Winston Churchill. Of course, I'm aware of the Great Famine and Churchill's role in it. I know of Churchill's loathing for Hindus. I'm aware of all of this. But I'm also very opposed to cancel culture. The man won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Let's listen to his words, even if you don't embrace the man. I'd like to read you some words. You're very familiar with them. It has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. That's endlessly quoted. Note the framing. It has been said. He's not saying it. It has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. But there is the broad feeling in our country that the people should rule, continuously rule, and that public opinion, expressed by all constitutional means, should shape, guide, and control the actions of ministers who are their servants and not their masters. I had to go to WikiQuote and add that but personally. The intellectual class doesn't like that but. Okay. I've never met your Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. I don't know Hindi or Gujarati or any of the other languages he speaks, so I've never heard any one of his speeches that everyone tell me are so captivating and so magical. They're lost on me. I've heard him speak in English. He's no Winston Churchill in English. But even critics agree, everyone seems to agree, that he has led a life dedicated to service. He's probably not a big fan of Winston Churchill. But he seems to understand the Churchillian approach to democracy. If Mr. Modi has been successful, if the BJP has been successful, it's not because of Hindutva or economic management or vote bank politics or any of these things I hear in the press. It's because Mr. Modi clearly understands that he is not the master of India. He's the servant of India. Thank you.